Okay, so you know how sometimes you just like get this feeling, this weird sense that there's something more going on, like beneath the surface of everything we see and do every day?
Yeah, I know what you mean, like some hidden forces, maybe?
Right, exactly. Like these tiny little things we can't even see are like pulling strings and shaping the world. And that's what we're getting into today. These weird, fascinating, kind of creepy things that might actually be influencing us.
I am intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay, so we're diving deep right into the world of this microscopic parasite called Toxoplasma gondii. You probably heard of it. It's the one that's like always linked to
Oh,
cats.
yeah, Toxoplasma gondii. I actually just read a paper on the effects of infection on the amygdala.
See, you're already ahead of the game. So the basic biology is already pretty wild, but hold on, because we're going way beyond that. We're going into, well, conspiracy theory territory here.
Oh, this I gotta hear.
All right, so the basic idea is that Toxoplasma gondii, it might not just be a common parasite, right? Some people think it's being deliberately used, like manipulated, to control people's behavior on a large scale. Mass behavioral control.
Now that's a claim. You have my attention.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page, Toxoplasma gondii is this single-celled parasite. It's super common, can infect pretty much any warm-blooded animal. But cats are where it really thrives. Like that's where it goes to reproduce.
Right, so it completes its life cycle in cats. Makes sense.
Exactly. Now, we humans, we can get infected in a few ways. Like if we eat undercooked meat, contaminated water, anything that's come into contact with cat poop, that kind of thing.
So pretty common ways to pick up a parasite, especially if you're not super careful about food prep.
Exactly. Now, the thing that really gets people talking, the thing that fuels all these wild theories, it's the fact that Toxoplasma can form these little cysts. They can hang out in your tissues, including, get this, your brain.
Ah, yes. The brain, the command center, the seat of consciousness, the target of many a good conspiracy theory.
Right. And these cysts, they can just stay there, dormant, for like your whole life.
Yeah.
And that's where the idea of Toxoplasma influencing behavior really kicks in.
I'm already seeing where this is going. But before we get too deep into the conspiracy side of things, let's take a step back and talk about the actual science. What do we know for sure about how Toxoplasma affects its hosts?
Okay, good point. So, scientifically speaking, the effects on other animals, those are pretty well documented. For example, rodents. When a rodent gets infected with Toxoplasma, their behavior can change in some seriously weird ways.
Okay, how so?
Well, for starters, they lose their fear of cats.
They what?
Yeah, they're not scared of cats anymore. Which, when you think about it from the parasite's perspective, it's actually pretty smart.
Yeah, if the goal is to get eaten by a cat to complete its life cycle, it makes sense to lose that fear.
Exactly. It increases the chances of the rodent, becoming cat food, which is exactly what Toxoplasma needs to reproduce. There's even some evidence suggesting that infected rodents become attracted to the smell of cat urine.
Oh, wow. So not only are they not afraid of cats, they're drawn to them. That is wild.
It really is. It's like this tiny parasite is pulling the strings, manipulating the rodent's behavior to suit its own needs.
It's an incredible example of how parasites can evolve such sophisticated strategies to guarantee their survival.
Totally. Now, when we start talking about humans, things get a lot more complicated, a lot less clear-cut. There's been research that shows a potential link, a correlation between Toxoplasma infection and certain subtle personality changes.
Okay, like what kinds of changes?
Well, some studies suggest there might be a link to increased risk-taking behavior, maybe a slightly higher chance of developing things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. But, and this is super important, we're talking about correlations here. It doesn't mean if you have Toxoplasma, you're suddenly going to start like skydiving without a parachute or something.
Right, correlation does not equal causation. We can't jump to conclusions like that.
Exactly. These links are often pretty weak, the research isn't always consistent, and we definitely don't have a clear understanding of cause and effect. In fact, tons of people have Toxoplasma, and they show no obvious changes in their behavior or personality whatsoever. They have no idea they're even infected.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to humans. Definitely a lot more research needed to understand the full picture.
Absolutely. And another thing to keep in mind is this concept of latency. Once you're infected, those Toxoplasma cysts, they can just hang out in your tissues, including your brain, for years, maybe even decades. We don't fully understand what long-term effects, if any, they might be having.
That latency aspect is really fascinating. It's like a ticking time bomb. We just don't know if it's actually going to go off or what the blast radius might be.
Exactly. So we've got this parasite. It can definitely mess with rodent brains. And in humans, Well, there's some hints, some possible links, but nothing concrete. And this is where the conspiracy theories come in, the toxoplasmosis conspiracy. It takes those known effects and blows them way out of proportion.
Okay, I'm ready for the conspiracy part. Let's hear it.
So the basic idea is that Toxoplasma isn't just subtly influencing a few individuals, right? It's controlling the behavior of huge chunks of the population. And someone or something is behind it, using it for some hidden, maybe evil purpose.
Wow, that's a pretty big claim.
Right, so imagine this. Toxoplasma is like secretly tweaking our thoughts, our preferences, even our actions. It's influencing everything, from the politicians we vote for to the products we buy, the trends we follow, how easily we're persuaded by advertising or propaganda.
Okay, so they're saying it's not just affecting individuals, it's shaping society as a whole.
Exactly. And then you start asking why. Why would someone want to do this? And that's when you get these really interesting, often pretty out there ideas.
So what are some of the reasons they come up with?
Well, one theory is that governments, or maybe corporations, are deliberately spreading Toxoplasma to create a more docile, obedient population. You know, people who are easier to control.
Like a form of mass mind control.
Right. There are even some theories about Toxoplasma being genetically modified to be even more effective at controlling human behavior. Or maybe some environmental factor is like amplifying its effects.
Wow, that's getting pretty sci-fi.
Right. And we can't forget about the cat agenda.
The cat agenda? What's that?
So this is the idea that cats are in on it, you know? Maybe not consciously, but they're spreading Toxoplasma, subtly influencing us to serve their needs, you know, making us feed them, pet them, basically do their bidding.
Ah, so the cats are the masterminds.
Exactly. It's a funny idea, but it fits into that whole conspiracy narrative.
I see. It's like they're using us as their pawns.
And you often see these theories trying to explain all sorts of negative social trends, like rising consumerism, people being less politically engaged, a decline in critical thinking.
Right. And suddenly it's Toxoplasma's fault.
Exactly. It becomes this scapegoat for everything wrong with society. But you know, we have to be careful here. These connections they make, they're usually based on weak correlations, if there's any connection at all. Sometimes it's just anecdotal, like, oh, my friend who loves cats is also super impulsive, must be the Toxoplasma.
Right. That kind of anecdotal evidence isn't very scientific.
Exactly. So you're probably wondering, how do these conspiracy theories gain any traction?
Yeah.
What kind of evidence do they use to support their claim?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, a lot of times they twist real scientific findings to fit their narrative. They'll take those studies that show a weak correlation between Toxoplasma and certain behaviors, and they'll present it as rock-solid proof of mind control.
Right, kind of like cherry-picking data to support a pre-existing conclusion.
Exactly. And they'll often completely ignore the limitations of the research, the fact that correlation doesn't equal causation. It's like showing you a blurry photo and say, see, this proves Bigfoot is real.
Yeah, not very convincing.
Not at all. And another thing they do is take research on animals, like those rodent studies we talked about, and apply it directly to humans. They say, well, if Toxoplasma can make rats lose their fear of cats, it must be doing the same thing to us.
But that's a big leap. Human brains are way more complex than rodent brains.
Exactly. It's like saying, well, if this antibiotic works on a goldfish, it must work the same way on a human. It just doesn't work that way.
Right, different species, different physiology. You can't make those kinds of generalizations.
And then there's the whole thing about the prevalence of Toxoplasma. They point to the fact that something like 30 to 50% of people worldwide are infected, and they say, see, it must be a deliberate spread. There's no way that many people would be infected naturally.
But we know that's not true. We know how people get infected, through undercooked meat, contaminated water, contact with cat feces. It's not some big mystery.
Exactly. It's just a really successful parasite, that's all. And then you get the anecdotal evidence. People will say things like, well, I know a bunch of cat owners and they're all really relaxed. Must be the Toxoplasma.
Ah, yes, the classic correlation-causation fallacy.
Exactly. They see two things happening together, and they assume one must be causing the other. But there could be a million other explanations.
Like maybe those people were just naturally relaxed to begin with, and that's why they got a cat.
Right. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. And then, to really hammer home the point, they'll even try to use cat behavior as evidence.
Oh, I'm curious to hear this. What do cats do?
So you know how cats can be like really independent, but then they also have their ways of getting your attention, demanding food, that sort of thing? Well, some people will say that's the Toxoplasma talking. It's controlling the cat, making it manipulate us.
So it's like the parasite is using the cat to control us.
Yeah, it's a funny thought, but it's a bit of a stretch. I mean, cats have been acting like cats for centuries, long before we knew anything about Toxoplasma.
True, cat's gonna cat. But I think it's time we turn back to the science and consider what the vast majority of experts actually say about all this.
Yeah, let's get back to reality. So the main point is, the scientific evidence for Toxoplasma causing significant behavioral changes in humans, it's just not very strong. There are some correlations, sure, but a direct causal link, that's really hard to prove.
Exactly. And as we've discussed, we can't just take what we see in rodents and apply it directly to humans. Our brains are just way too different.
And there are perfectly natural explanations for why Toxoplasma is so common. No need to invent some elaborate conspiracy about deliberate spread.
Plus, there's absolutely no evidence to support the idea that Toxoplasma is being genetically modified or anything like that. That's pure speculation.
And so much of the evidence they use, it relies on this fundamental error of confusing correlation with causation. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one is causing the other.
It's really important to understand that distinction.
Absolutely. So, bottom line, while the biology of Toxoplasma is fascinating, the idea that it's being used for mass mind control, that's just not supported by the science. It's a really interesting conspiracy theory, but that's all it is.
This whole conversation really highlights how easily scientific findings can be misinterpreted and used to support unfounded claims, especially when you mix in fear and suspicion.
It's a good reminder to be critical of the information we encounter, especially when it sounds too good or too crazy to be true.
Exactly. We need to be able to separate fact from fiction to evaluate evidence objectively. And that means understanding how science works, how to interpret research findings, and how to recognize logical fallacies.
It's like a muscle. The more we use our critical thinking skills, the stronger they become. And that's something we can all benefit from no matter what we're reading or listening to.
I think this is a good place to wrap things up. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, this whole discussion about Toxoplasma, it makes you wonder what other scientific findings have been twisted and distorted to support conspiracy theories. What other examples are out there? Something to think about, something to investigate. And when you do, remember to be critical, to ask questions, and always look for the evidence. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.